I'm not clean, she whispered into the silence. And when the cloth finally fell, the cowboy couldn't breathe. What followed could break a man's soul, or save it. The winter wind pressed hard against the wooden siding of the cabin, a hollow, restless sound that rattled through the pines and drifted down into the valley. Snow had been falling for days, light at first, then heavier until the trails vanished under white, and even the wagon ruts looked like nothing but dim shadows in the drifts. Inside the small cabin, a man leaned against the doorframe, shoulders broad, coat rough and weathered by years of use. His name was Elias Turner, a ranch hand who'd carved a life of solitude out on the Montana frontier. He had not expected company that night, least of all the kind that came to his door close to midnight, footsteps crunching faintly in the frozen silence. When he heard it, Elias reached instinctively for the rifle propped near the hearth, though he didn't raise it. Out here one learned quick that a knock in the dead of night could be mercy or menace. The knock came soft, hesitant. Almost. Elias pulled the door open, and the firelight spilled onto the snow. Standing there was a young woman, her cloak torn, the fabric clinging to her shoulders as though it had once been fine, but now carried the dust of too many miles. Her cheeks were raw from wind, and her lips trembled, not only from the cold, but something deeper. "Please," she whispered, barely audible over the wind. Elias's eyes narrowed. He wasn't a man given to illusions, but for a moment it seemed the storm itself had pushed her here. He stepped back, motioning her inside. She moved past him, her body trembling. The air in the cabin was thick with smoke, and the faint smell of coffee grounds boiled too long. But to her it must have felt like heaven after the night. She kept her shawl wrapped tight, though the edges of it slipped as she crossed the room. "What's your name?" Elias asked, his voice roughened by disuse. The woman hesitated. She lowered her gaze, fingers worrying the cloth at her chest. Finally she murmured, "Lydia." Her name felt fragile in the room, as if spoken too loud it might shatter. Elias nodded once, not pressing. "You're safe here. Sit." He gestured toward the chair near the fire. Lydia sank down, the flames casting a warm glow across her face, revealing exhaustion etched into every line. For a long while she said nothing, simply staring into the fire as if it might swallow the memories clinging to her. Elias busied himself at the stove, pouring a measure of hot water into a tin cup. He set it in her hands, and she held it as though afraid to let go. When at last she spoke, her voice was faint, yet it carried something that pulled at him more than he expected. "I shouldn't be here." "Storm don't leave much choice," Elias replied evenly. "No one's turned away in weather like this?" Lydia shook her head. Her fingers tightened around the cloth that hung from her shoulders, the firelight slipping across her collarbone. "I'm not," she faltered, the words catching like thorns in her throat. Then she whispered, barely above breath, "I'm not clean." The words settled heavy in the cabin, thicker than the smoke, heavier than the storm outside. Elias froze, his hand resting on the back of the second chair. He didn't know what she meant, at least not fully, but the weight in her tone told him it wasn't the dirt from the road she spoke of. He didn't move closer. He didn't turn away either. Lydia sat rigid, her shawl slipping slightly as she clutched at it with trembling fingers. When the cloth slid lower still, revealing more of the bruised curve of her shoulder, Elias's breath caught despite himself. He hadn't been near a woman in years, not like this. And there was something raw in the sight of her, fragile yet defiant, broken yet standing. He tore his gaze away, jaw tightening. "You don't have to explain," he said, voice low, but Lydia shook her head, tears glinting now at the corners of her eyes. "You don't understand. Men took from me, and I can't," her voice broke. "I can't be what I was." The storm howled against the walls, but inside the cabin the silence was sharper, aching. Elias's chest tightened, not with desire but with something deeper, anger at shadows he couldn't yet see, sorrow for the woman trembling before him. "You survived," he said after a long moment, each word deliberate. That's what matters. Lydia met his gaze then, and in her eyes was a battle between shame and desperate need. For safety, for dignity, for someone who would not see her as ruined. The fire crackled. The cloth slipped further. Elias turned away, pressing his palm against the rough wood of the table, steadying himself. "Rest tonight," he said. "We'll speak more come morning." But the truth hung between them like the smoke. Elias had no idea if morning would bring peace or danger. Whoever Lydia was running from, she hadn't left them far behind. And outside, in the distance, faint under the wind, Elias thought he heard the echo of hooves. The sound was faint, carried by the wind, so faint Elias might have imagined it. Yet the instinct that had kept him alive through countless winters told him otherwise. Hooves, more than one. Far off, but closing. He didn't let on right away. Lydia sat close to the fire, her cloak gathered about her like armor, though it failed to cover the tremor in her hands. Elias studied her quietly, the way she leaned forward as though bracing for blows that would not come, the way her gaze darted toward the door whenever the wind shifted. "You traveled alone?" Elias asked at last, his tone calm. Lydia hesitated, her lips pressing tight. She shook her head. Not at first. There was no need for her to say more. He'd seen it before, women fleeing, sometimes from husbands with heavy fists, sometimes from men who claimed ownership like cattle. Her eyes told enough. Whoever she'd left behind was dangerous, and they would not give her up willingly. Elias moved to the shelf by the door, checking the rifle. The barrel gleamed faint in the firelight. He set it back gently, not wanting to frighten her. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll see you safe to the next settlement." But Lydia shook her head fiercely. "You don't understand." She pulled the cloth tighter around her shoulders, voice breaking. "They'll come. They'll find me. They always do." Something, in the way she said it, "they always do," made Elias's jaw clench. He crouched slightly, lowering himself so she wouldn't have to look up at him. "Then we'll make sure they don't." Her eyes darted over his face, searching for any sign of deceit or empty promise. She must have found none because her shoulders sagged, though her grip on the cloak didn't loosen. The wind rose, rattling the shutters. Elias crossed to the door and lifted the latch, just enough to look out. Snow drifted sideways, pale in the moonlight. He strained his ears. Nothing now but the storm. Still, he barred the door when he closed it. Behind him, Lydia stirred. "Why? Are you helping me?" Elias paused. It was a fair question. He had built a life alone for a reason. Solitude was easier than entanglement, safer than trust. And yet, he looked at her, hunched by the fire, eyes full of both fear and something else, longing for a place where she might be seen as more than what had been done to her. "I don't hold with men hunting women like game," he said simply. "And I've seen enough winters alone to know a person can break under the weight of it." She looked away, blinking quickly, her throat working as though she swallowed words too heavy to speak. For a time they sat in silence, the fire crackling, the storm pressing at the walls. Then Lydia shifted, the cloak slipping once more. She caught it too late, and the fabric fell aside enough to reveal the faint outline of bruises, yellowed and dark along her collarbone. Elias turned his eyes away, but not before the sight tightened his chest. Rage stirred in him, quiet, steady, the kind that burned colder than fire. "Did they hurt you bad?" he asked softly. Her breath hitched. "Enough." He nodded, nothing more. She did not need pity. He knew it would cut deeper than any wound. What she needed was space enough to heal, and a man who would not take from her what she had not freely given. The minutes stretched. Lydia stared into the flames as though she might crawl inside them. Then, so faintly Elias almost didn't catch it, she whispered. "When the cloth fell, the last time," they laughed. Her words pierced the room like a nail driven deep. Elias closed his eyes briefly, fighting the urge to pace, to storm out into the night after shadows he could not yet see. When he opened them again, his gaze steadied on her. "No one will laugh at you here," he said firmly. The promise hung between them, not as something grand, but as solid as the cabin walls. She looked up at him, and for the first time there, was no shame in her eyes, only the fragile beginnings of trust. But before Elias could speak again, the sound returned, clearer this time. Hooves closer, several. The hair on his neck rose. Lydia froze, her face draining of color. "They've come." Elias crossed the cabin in 2 strides, snuffing the lantern so only the firelight remained. He motioned for her to stay low, then retrieved the rifle. "Back room," he whispered, but she shook her head, her voice a desperate hiss. "If they see the tracks to your door, they won't leave you be. You'll be dragged into it. They don't care who stands in their way." Elias glanced at her, the rifle steady in his hands. "Then let 'em try." Outside, the storm muffled but could not hide the sound of horses pulling up. A man's voice barked something Elias couldn't make out, followed by the crunch of boots in the snow. Lydia's hand clutched his sleeve, her eyes wide, shimmering with terror. Elias breathed slow, steady, and in that breath he made a choice. He would not hand her over. Whatever storm these men carried with them, he would meet it head on. The knock came, hard, commanding. Elias raised the rifle, the fire throwing long shadows across the cabin walls. His heart pounded, but his voice was calm when he called out, "Who's there?" A pause. Then a rough voice answered, muffled through the wood. "We're looking for a girl, dark hair, came this way." Lydia's grip tightened on his arm. Her whisper trembled. "Please, don't let them take me." Elias didn't turn to look at her. His eyes stayed on the door, his finger brushing the trigger. "She's not here," he said, his voice like iron. Outside, silence fell. Thick, dangerous silence. Then the sound of boots crunching closer. Another voice, lower, meaner. "Open the door, friend. Best not make us ask twice." Lydia's breath broke in a sob. Elias's grip tightened on the rifle. Inside the cabin, the air grew heavy. Firelight, flickering across 2 faces, one lined with fear, the other carved with grim resolve. Whatever came next would change both their lives forever. The pounding on the door came again, harder this time, rattling the hinges. Elias steadied his stance, shoulders squared, the rifle pressed firm to his chest. Lydia huddled behind him, her breath sharp and shallow, as though each knock struck her ribs instead of the wood. "Open up!" the first voice barked again, rough and insistent. "We don't got all night." Elias said nothing. He let the fire crackle, let the storm howl through the eaves, let silence stretch until it became its own form of resistance. Then came the sound of boots, circling. Snow crunched, slow and deliberate. Whoever was out there was testing the ground, studying the place, like wolves sniffing at a cabin wall. Lydia's hand pressed against Elias's arm. "They'll break in. They've done it before. Elias glanced back, his eyes steady on hers. "Not tonight." A voice outside, lower and edged with mockery, cut through the night. "Don't be a fool, stranger. The girl don't belong to you. She belongs to us. You hand her over, we'll be on our way." Lydia flinched, a soft gasp escaping her lips. She closed her eyes, shaking her head as if the very words were chains. Elias's jaw tightened. "No one belongs to you," he called back, each syllable measured, cold as the snow outside. There was a pause, then harsh laughter. "Big talk from a man hiding behind a door. Let's see if you still got that tongue when we cut it out." The laughter turned to muttered curses, and then the sudden thud of a shoulder slamming against the door. The wood groaned under the force, the bar creaked, and Lydia let out a sharp cry. Elias raised the rifle, his voice sharp now. "The next man who hits this door catches lead. You want her? You'll pay in blood." Silence. Even the storm seemed to hush for a heartbeat. Then the boots retreated, crunching in snow. Elias tracked them in his mind, knowing full well they hadn't left, only regrouped. He lowered his rifle just enough to breathe, then looked at Lydia. She was trembling, her cloak half fallen, her eyes fixed on the flames as if she could will them to burn hotter, brighter, enough to chase the terror from her bones. "They won't stop," she whispered hoarsely. "They never stop." "Then we outlast 'em," Elias replied, but she shook her head, suddenly fierce. You don't understand. They're not after me because of who I am. They're after me because of what I know. Elias frowned, tilting his head. What you know. Her lips parted, then closed again. For a long, tense moment, she seemed caught between silence and confession. Finally, her voice broke free, raw and low. They run more than cattle, more than horses. They run people, women, children, sold like sacks of grain. Elias felt his stomach twist, the weight of her words hitting him harder than any blow. He'd heard whispers before, ugly rumors drifting across settlements, but hearing it plain, he understood now why she was hunted like prey. You tried to get away, Elias said softly. I saw, she corrected, her voice trembling. I saw too much. They caught me once. They meant to keep me quiet. When I got loose, they swore they'd make an example of me. She lifted, trembling, fingers to the edge of her collar, pulling it just enough to reveal the angry scars and bruises hidden beneath. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. That's what they do when they say you're not clean. They break you until you believe it yourself. The words struck Elias like a hammer to his chest. He had no words to mend what she'd endured, no simple oath to erase it. But the rage that simmered inside him now burned with a direction. You're clean here, he said firmly, almost fiercely. Do you hear me? Whatever they told you, whatever they did, you're clean. Her breath hitched and she turned her face away, but not before he saw the tears slipping free. Outside, a whistle pierced the storm. More hooves answered, the sound of reinforcements arriving. Elias cursed under his breath. They've brought more, Lydia whispered, dread curling around each syllable. Elias moved quickly, dousing the fire until only embers glowed, leaving the cabin cloaked in darkness save for a faint orange glow. He positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. Basement trap? Lydia asked, hope flickering. Elias shook his head. Only the back window. Too small for a man, just enough for you. Her eyes widened. No, I won't leave you to face them alone. You think I'll stand by while they drag you out screaming? Elias's voice was low, tight. I've seen men like this before, and I've buried a few. If I can't buy you time, none of this matters. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Then let me fight beside you. I'm not as weak as I look. Elias looked down at her. There was no begging in her gaze now, no pleading, only fierce, desperate determination. You'll fight, he said after a long beat. But you'll fight smart. When I tell you to run, you run. If I fall, she cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. Don't say it. Don't you dare. For a moment, something flickered between them, something unspoken but undeniable. A bond forged in the fire of fear, tempered by defiance. Then the night split open with another crash against the door. The bar splintered. Elias swung the rifle toward the sound, breath steady, eyes hard. Now, he whispered. The door buckled, wood cracking under the force. Shadows moved outside, men's voices snarling threats. Lydia crouched low, clutching a short iron poker from the hearth like a weapon. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned. The next slam nearly tore the door from its hinges. Snow swirled in through the cracks. Elias raised the rifle, his voice thundering in the cabin's small space. Last warning! Step through that door, and you won't step out again! But the men outside laughed, cruel and sure of themselves. Then let's see what you're made of, old man! The door exploded inward. Wood splintered. Cold air rushed in with the snow. Shapes loomed in the darkness. 3, 4, maybe more. Elias fired. The blast lit the room for a heartbeat, carving sharp outlines of faces twisted in malice, of Lydia crouched with terror and fury in her eyes. One man fell with a scream, another cursed and charged. Chaos erupted. Lydia struck out with the poker, catching a man across the arm. He howled, grabbing for her cloak. She tore free, stumbling back. Elias fired again, the rifle kicking against his shoulder. But more kept coming. Boots thundered across the floor, fists swinging. And in the crush of it, one voice rose above the rest, a voice dripping venom, the same she had heard in her nightmares. There you are, girl. Thought you could run forever. Lydia froze. The cloth slipped from her shoulders entirely, falling to the floor. She turned slowly, her breath strangled in her throat, and when Elias saw the man step forward, the scar across his cheek, the cruel smile stretching beneath cold eyes, he understood. This was no gang of faceless riders. This was the one she had fled from, the one who had broken her. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside the cabin now. The scarred man filled the doorway, snow curling around his shoulders like smoke from a forge. His eyes cut the room in two, pinning Lydia where she stood. "Well, well," he drawled, voice low and poisonous. "You've made me chase you farther than any other. But I knew." He stepped forward, boots grinding against splintered wood. "I knew you couldn't stay hidden forever." Lydia's hand trembled around the iron poker, her breath ragged. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet held to the floor as though nailed there. Elias shifted between them, rifle leveled, voice sharp. "You take another step, and I'll put you in the ground." The scarred man's gaze slid to him, almost amused. "You? One man against me and mine?" His smirk widened. "You ain't nothing but a grave waiting to be dug." More men crowded behind him, their faces hard, shadows shifting in the dim firelight. Elias could feel the numbers against him, the weight of it pressing down. But he didn't flinch. "I've been outnumbered before," Elias said, his tone as flat as the Wyoming plains. "And I'm still standing." The leader's smile faltered, just slightly. Then he spat on the floor. "Kill him." The room erupted again, boots charging, fists swinging, the clash of flesh and wood. Elias fired, the muzzle flash blinding, dropping the first man through the door. Lydia swung with her poker, catching another across the temple, but hands grabbed, pulled, shoved. In the struggle, the scarred man lunged for Lydia. He caught her wrist, twisting until she gasped, forcing her closer. "There's no running from me," he hissed, his scarred face inches from hers. "You'll never wash it clean." Her knees nearly buckled, the words tearing through her chest like glass. Old shame, old fear, the lies they'd carved into her rose up again, threatening to swallow her whole. But then Elias's voice rang out, fierce and unyielding. "Don't! Listen to him, Lydia." Her eyes snapped toward Elias. He was pinned against the wall, struggling against two men, but his voice cut through the chaos. "You're not his. You're not broken. You're not dirty. You're—" He shoved one man back with a savage grunt. "You're more than anything he ever tried to make you." The words struck her like lightning. And for the first time since that night months ago, when they had stripped her of everything, she believed, just for a breath, that maybe he was right. Her grip tightened on the poker. With a raw cry, she wrenched her wrist free, swinging upward. The iron caught the scarred man across his jaw, snapping his head sideways. He stumbled, stunned. Elias broke free, grabbing the rifle stock like a club. He swung hard, driving another man to the floor. Blood streaked the planks. The cabin was a storm of shouts, gunpowder, and fear. The scarred man recovered with a snarl, drawing a pistol from his belt. He leveled it at Elias. Lydia saw it before Elias did. Time seemed to slow. "No!" she screamed, hurling herself forward. She struck his arm just as the gun fired. The shot went wild, splintering the wall. Elias turned, eyes blazing. He surged, forward, rifle butt slamming into the scarred man's chest, knocking him backward through the broken doorway and out into the snow. The leader staggered, breath heaving, pistol still in hand. Snowflakes melted on his face, streaking with sweat and blood. "You'll regret this," he spat. Elias stepped out into the night after him, the storm whipping around them. "No, you will." The two men clashed, fist to fist, blow to blow, boots slipping in the snow. The others, wounded and broken, had scattered into the night, their courage spent. Only these two remained, their fight lit by the ghostly glow of moonlight through clouds. Lydia stumbled to the doorway, watching, her heart in her throat. The scarred man lunged with his pistol again, but Elias caught his wrist, forcing it skyward. A shot rang out into the storm. Elias twisted, the gun clattering into the drifts. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, forcing him down into the snow. "You think you can bury the truth?" Elias growled, his fist hammering into the scarred face. "But the truth don't stay buried," the man gasped, coughing blood, but sneered even then. "She'll always be filthy. You can't change that." Elias raised his fist again, then froze. Slowly, he looked back at Lydia, standing in the doorway, her cloak gone, scars bared to the winter night. Her eyes met his, wide but unwavering, and Elias lowered his hand. "No," he said, voice low but clear. "You don't get to define her. Not anymore." He stood, stepping back. "Go. Crawl back to whatever pit spat you out. If you come near her again, I'll finish it." The scarred man struggled to rise, spitting blood into the snow. His eyes darted to Lydia, but for the first time, there was no control, no power, in his stare. Only hate. He staggered away into the storm, vanishing like a shadow swallowed by night. Silence followed. Only the wind remained, sighing through the trees. Elias stood breathing hard, the fight still in his bones. He turned back to the cabin, where Lydia stood trembling. He stepped toward her. For a moment, he feared she might shrink back, the weight of all she'd endured too heavy. But instead, she stepped forward. Her voice shook, but she lifted her chin. "You don't understand. I'm not clean." The words cut through the cold, raw and fragile. Elias reached out, gently, his rough hand brushing her shoulder, where the cloak had fallen. His eyes held hers steady. "Lydia, those scars don't make you unclean. They make you alive. They make you stronger than anyone who ever tried to break you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot against the freezing night. She wanted to argue, to deny, but the way he looked at her, steady, unflinching, seeing her, only her, left no room for the lies she had carried. Her breath shuddered, and for the first time, she let the tears come without shame. Elias pulled her close, his arms solid and warm against the cold. She pressed her face against his chest, the storm raging around them, but inside, there was stillness. At last, she whispered, her voice breaking, but sure. "Then maybe I can start over." Elias rested his chin atop her hair. "You already have." They stood there until the storm began to ease, snow settling like a clean blanket over the blood-stained ground. By dawn, the cabin bore the scars of the night, the broken door, the shattered wood, the dark stains across the floor. But in the pale light of morning, Lydia no longer saw ruins. She saw survival. She wrapped a fresh cloth around her shoulders, not to hide, but to warm. Elias repaired the door with steady hands, his presence as quiet and dependable as the sun, rising over the horizon. When the last nail was driven in, he looked to her. "You're free of them now. Whatever road you take from here, it's yours." Lydia met his gaze. Fear still lingered, yes, but beneath it was something else. Hope. Her lips curved, the faintest smile. "Then maybe I don't need to walk it alone." Elias's answering smile was small, almost reluctant, but it reached his eyes. "Reckon I wouldn't mind that." And so, in that battered cabin on the edge of nowhere, two broken souls, one marked by the cruelty of others, the other by the weight of his own solitary years, found something neither expected. Not perfection, not the erasure of scars, but the chance to begin again. The West was still wild. Danger still lurked on every horizon. But for Lydia, for Elias, there was a new kind of freedom. The freedom of being seen and believed and chosen despite the shadows. And in that truth, she was clean at last.